tree. In Northeast, we have different weather. So we are retreating from monsoon right now. I'm in Kerala.
Yeah.
Oh,
In which city right now, actually?
I am near to Mangalore airport.
Oh,
You might
oh,
have heard.
Chat for now.
Okay.
Get the funding from Arab states. Did you hear about that, Dr. Muhammad Sirajuddin? Welcome to our webinar, Professor Salsakahasi. Are you there already?
yes. Hello, I am.
Assalamualaikum. Welcome here. I hope that you are fine there.
Yes. Alhamdulillah, I'm fine. Let me just turn my camera on because I see most of the people aren't there. Okay, good.
Yeah. How are you today? I hope that you are very well because it's 12 p.m. there.
It's 12 p.m. It's noon. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, it's still morning here.
Yes, 2-hour difference, I think.
Yeah, we have 3 speakers now. Bapak Niko Adam from Indonesia, Dr. Sirajuddin from India, and Professor
شكرا لكم لمؤسسة الNBC مع الاندونيسي الخدمات على المية. بالرغم احنا يعني عندنا مسكرين الطرق علينا وصعبة حياتنا ومش قادرين نطلع ولا ننزل وحياتنا صعبة، ويعني الحمد لله يكتر خيرهم هيهم بيودوا لنا المي اللي مفنطرة ويخلف عليهم يعني اللي بيساعدوا الشعب على هيك مساعدة.
أشكر مؤسسة الاندونيسيا في الNBC في اندونيسيا، واحنا بوضع كورونا ودنا مي مفنطرة والكلام.
أنا بشكر جمعية NBC على تصرف المياه اللي وفرت لنا إياه، وأنا بشكرهم جزيل الشكر وإنهم دائما يا رب يدعمونا، ولأنه المياه لأنها غير صالحة للشرب، والمياه دائما يدعمونا مياه مفلترة، لأن الوضع عندنا صعب جدا، وأنت شايف حالة كورونا، الوضع يعني صعب 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 إنه الواحد يروح يعبي مياه. يعني أنا بتمنى إن دائما يدعمونا بمياه وحاجة ثانية، لأنه الوضع عندنا صعب مأساوي جدا، تصرف المياه عندنا بالمرة معدوم.
نشكر مؤسسة NBC اللي وفرت لنا المياه، لأنه إحنا في وضع كمرض كورونا وولادنا ولا بيطلع ولا بننزل ولا بنعبي مية ولا بنشوفها، يعني بنشكر الجمعية اللي حنت علينا وعبت لنا مية للأولاد الصغار نشرب، ولأنها هي مش موجودة عندنا بالمرة المية، فإلنا أكثر من شهر بنعاني من المية، إنه ما فيش عندنا مية بالمرة. ونشكر الNBC إنه عبونا مية وساعدونا إنه إحنا نشرب.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نحن نشكر الجمعية مؤسسة الNBC لدعم الشعب الفلسطيني بالمياه المفلترة المعدنية، وجزاهم الله كل خير وشكرا لهم اخوانا الاندونيسيين. الوضع صعب عنا واجت المي في وقتها، وشكرا لهم ويعطيهم العافية وفي ميزان حسناتهم، وشكرا لهم وان شاء الله ربنا يعطيهم هيك في ميزان حسناتهم انه تبرعوا لنا بالمية اللي اجت في وقتها في الوضع اللي احنا فيه، وضع كورونا، وضع الدنيا شوب والجو اللي احنا فيه والوضع الصعب، اليهود من جهة والمرض كورونا من جهة، ربنا يبعدوا عنا وعنهم إن شاء الله ويعطيهم في صحتهم وميزان حسناتهم يا رب.
نشكر مؤسسة NBC على المية الحلوة، والله أجتنا في وقتها ويخلف عليك وبارك الله فيكم، وإن شاء الله يا رب تدعمونا بحاجة أحسن من هيك، وإحنا في الحصار هذا وفي الكورونا مرض الكورونا، يا رب جزاكم الله كل خير.
نشكر الأندونيسي اللي وصلت لنا المية، لأنه مقطوع علينا المية والمواصلات صعبة ومش قادرين نوفر إجازة المية اللي نشرب فيها، وكتر خيرهم عن طريق الأندونيسي.
Invited me for this session on discussing the various aspects of international assistance for Palestine. We may say international aid.
Yeah.
So I directly start my presence without any other further elaboration. Friends, the history of international assistance or international aid to Palestine is the history of Palestine itself. We all know that there is no need of further elaboration on the question that Palestine is an occupied territory. So since from 1948, Palestinians, one of the most persecuted sections of our planet, has been given international aid, and they are continue to receive aid through various channels. Since 90s, we have seen they have been provided with aid through Palestinian Authority, different political factions, charity organizations, etc., etc. And this has been the modus operandi of Palestinian aid or aid to Palestine. And when you talk about international assistance to Palestine, you cannot skip the history and the relevance of an institution like United Nations Relief Work Agency, especially meant for Palestine. And this organization has took care of Palestinian people in Palestine, occupied Palestine, where they are in interface with the occupying power, Israel, and in other parts of the region like Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, etc. And as far as the relevance of this agency, United Nations Relief Work Agency, is concerned, it has a big relevance in contemporary era, because we are in contemporary era, various international actors are confused over the three-pronged peace strategy, what we call the status of Jerusalem, number one, number two, the demarcation of border with international consensus, and obviously number three, the resettlement of refugees. So this organization has a big role to play in this three-pronged peace strategy, is what I mean. Then international assistance to Palestine in contemporary era has to be seen in two phases. One starting from 1993. Obviously, we all know the significance of 1993. And 1993 to 2004, Palestine has received different phases of foreign assistance. 1993 to 2004, Palestine was said to be given $9 billion foreign aid. Then in subsequent years, $15 billion, this amount has reached to $15 billion. And in 2011, various reports have suggested that Palestine is receiving aid from international community. So let's look into the deeper aspects of this international transfer, what people are talking about. And there is a perception that Palestinians are provided with much more what they are deserving. And there is a rumor also running around that they have been given what they want, and this kind of political perception is also persisting. What I would like to say is that in the first phase of 1993 to till you can say 2011, these international transfers did not make any path-breaking change in the ground situations. This is what I want to say as first point. Number two, these foreign transfers, these foreign assistance, pledged foreign assistance, did not erect institutions of sustainable employment or sustainable economic practices. So what is it all about then? And when we talk about international aid per se, generally international aid is a formula of strong nations and weak nations. Powerful nations with financial capability transfer money to poor nations with conditionalities. So internationally, globally, international trade regime has been critiqued because of stringent conditionalities that sometimes question the sovereignty and the autonomy of the receiving country. So as far as Palestine is concerned, I am looking into three aspects where this aid regime has put an impact on. One is benefit, then second, the implication on the economy per se, and three obviously is politics. As far as benefits are concerned, the international transfers, humanitarian assistance, which came in form of pledges, could not benefit a self-sustaining economy. In the same way, since international aid formed a large part of GDP, it seemed that the local economy is being controlled or influenced by the external actors. And in the similar way, as far as politics is concerned, we have seen that 2006 elections was a landmark in the history of occupied Palestine. After many years of tumultuous periods, Palestine elected their government. And what happened is that international actors and Western powers and United States per se reacted sharply to this election because these elections, according to their formula, could not fit into the what they call the frame of democracy. So 2000 elections, the political churnings in Palestine also affected the way in which international trade is being provided, the way in which the international trade and donors' generosity is being framed. This is what I want to put as the third limitation of international aid in Palestine. And when you look back, it's not about Palestinian people getting benefits. The history of international assistance in Palestine obviously is a history of failure of promises. There is a stark difference between pledges and actual payments. You know, in 2019, it was found out that donors failed to deliver aid to Palestinians. There have been many conferences pledging international assistance to Palestine, like Paris Conference, which pledged $7.7 billion. Then Egypt Conference, which pledged $4.5 billion. Then many other conferences, many private donations. Overall tally would come to $14 billion. And all these pledges were made. And in 2009, it was found that donors failed to deliver aid to Palestinians. So there is something called actual pledge and actual payments. If you are declaring something, that has to be actual in practice, that has to be practiced. So in this way, Palestinian people have been at the receiving end, which is not as good as world is perceiving. And obviously there is different institutes have charted the graph of foreign aid to Palestine. Obviously United States was the largest donor, and there are many other countries from Europe like UK, Sweden, Japan, Switzerland, etc. So now we are discussing international aid at a specific political context. Number one, Israel is strategically trying to maneuver, trying to impact their foreign policy all over the Arab neighbors. We have seen two normalization measures from two Arab countries and two more. As the moderator was pointing out in the beginning, two more countries are on the way of normalization. And normalization is not a phenomenon which started today. Zionist movement itself started as a normalization movement, and it always tried to imply various methods to influence the actors in and around to implement its deceitful policies. And we are discussing international aid at a moment when US fund cuts have become an official policy. What is this all about? US fund cuts is indeed a vicious attack on Palestine. This dramatic shift in Trump policy has to be seen as a trade-off for political compromise. We have analogies. It is not Palestine the only militarized zone in the world. There are many other militarized zones in the world. Take the example of Jammu and Kashmir, where there is a high level of militarization, and full-speed internet has been cut off, and movements are restricted. So the government of India, under the leadership of Narendra Modi, is asking the people of Kashmir that if you want full-speed internet, if you want freedom to move, you should stop asking political questions. You should stop asking for political rights. In the similar way, US President Donald Trump is asking the Palestinian people and Palestinian refugees who are caught up in different parts of the world, directly and indirectly, that if you want funds, if you want our support, you should stop asking for your political rights. So fund cuts is directly proportional to an attack on two-state solution. So this is meant to lower the level of two-state solution discourse and to influence the donor generosity globally. So this is indeed an attack on the people of Palestine. But at the same time, we are not surprised, because when you talk about fund cuts, we should also see how Israel is being funded by United States of America. As far as USA is concerned, Israel is a pet boy, and the former administration, US Barack Obama, has in its later years promised Israel $3.3 billion annual aid, and US administration has been doing this all these years. And as far as US is concerned, this has to do, funding Israel's apartheid state has to do with two dimensions. Number one, United States think that it is the world police, and so as to maintain their influence in Middle East, it has to supply strength to the apartheid state of Israel. And secondly, funding Israel is also a domestic US policy, where different actors from Democrats to Republicans and to the Israel lobby compete each other over the question of funding Israel. It is also a part of domestic politics from which this idea emerged that Israel is a satellite state of the United States in Middle East, where from it can have a veto power from without, you can say. And when you talk about Israel and the US in relationship, Israel has been funded by Christian Zionist lobby, and Christian Zionist lobby is always historically in tandem, work together with Jewish Zionist lobby to establish a Jewish state in the place of Palestine. So I am not going into history. So this is the politics behind the fund cut which is being pursued by United States of America. Various reports have come, and findings of United Nations Conference on Trade and Development has pointed out that in 2018 and 2019, economy and humanitarian conditions were all-time low. Per capita income fell, mass unemployment increased, unemployment in Gaza is around 50%, and overall in Palestine, the poverty has deepened. And here comes, in between comes the environmental concerns, the master of all concerns. There are two aspects to environmental concerns in Palestine. One is degradation. The occupation of Palestine has led to the degradation of self-reliant Palestinian agriculture and economy. Recently, we have seen the news of Palestinian Gaza fishermen being shot by occupation forces in Gaza. This kind of day-to-day helpful experience has been pushed on the people of Palestine. And the second environmental concern, obviously, is the denial. You know that Palestine is a resourceful area, and there is much potential to be unearthed. And Palestinian people, who are the indigenous people of the land of Palestine, they are being deprived of their natural right to resources like oil and other resources. And obviously, we have other crises like water crisis, climate crisis, pollution, solid waste management. All these are accelerated by the factors of occupation or militarization, you can say. Then, how is Israel sustaining? How is Israel succeeding in dismantling the regime of international aid? We have seen a huge amount is pumped into Palestine, pledged into Palestine, which we have seen. But whatever aid, international assistance is entering Palestinian territory, Israel tried to dismantle it. It has attacked the infrastructures of foreign aid, like it has attacked foreign aid provided by European funded projects. And politically, they allege that Zionist lobby, the apartheid state of Israel, allege that the United Nations facilities and the facilities of other donors are contributing terrorism, which is a claim which we cannot believe. And secondly, they are also arguing that Palestinian militants are using the infrastructure of foreign aid. which is also a childish claim. Then the Israel argue that the United Nations Relief Works Agency staff is often sympathetic and in cooperation to Hamas, which is also a childish claim. And all these political allegations can be tarnished, can be countered when we look into the ground situation of Palestine, what is happening in Palestine right now. So I'm asking this question openly. Why is international aid is important for Palestine? Why international assistance? The answer is, even after 72 years of Nakba, what the people call the historical dispossession of the people of Palestine, even after 72 years of great dispossession, more than 5 million Palestinian people are still depending on the foreign assistance provided by various agencies right from United Nations. And dismantling such agencies, dismantling donors who are generous to Palestine, dismantling any kind of humanitarian aid to Palestine is indeed a crime against humanity. Whoever forces are joining in hands with dismantling the infrastructure of humanitarian aid to Palestinian people should be exposed at an international level. This is my take. And as a conclusion, I would like to make 3 points. These all questions of humanitarian development, rights, crisis, empathy, sympathy, donor, receiver, all these questions come under the larger umbrella of institutional crisis, which we have seen in the land of occupied Palestine in the last 7 decades. So you cannot disconnect the idea of refugee crisis. You cannot disconnect the refugee crisis or unemployment in Gaza or water crisis in West Bank from the broader understanding, broader issues of occupation. Zionist entity is occupying Palestine. So Palestine is being an occupied state. As an occupied state, we are witnessing various anomalies of occupation like the restrictions on the freedom of movement, transfer of populations, illegal practices of racism, etc., etc. So I understand that to solve the Palestinian conundrum, the Palestinian issue, we have to join in hands to pitch into the political question. The basic political question is why Israel is violating international law. Why Israel is accelerating the already bad condition of refugee crisis in Middle East. Why the Israel is collaborating with US imperialism. These are the broader questions from which we have to address the issues in Palestine. And finally, when we talk academically, when we talk from a conceptual vantage point, we have to see that there are various approaches. Scholars like Sahar Rad has tried to understand how the dynamics works in conflict zones. For example, economy of Palestine territories are receiving highest per capita income aid. But according to Sahar Rad, no indicators of development there is no indicators of development. And at the same time, there is no improvement of standard of living as well. So this is the truth of Palestine. This is the truth of Palestine. So I understand that I posit that there are 2 things which you have to keep in mind when we understand a militarized zone like Palestine. International aid regime take a generalized approach. This generalized approach has to be rethought of. We have to understand what is working on the ground. The international assistance regime should understand the challenges on the ground, because the institutions are not working, the abstract general framework are not getting applied in militarized zones. So we have to deal with different actors, the occupying forces, the occupied people, the agencies like international agencies like United Nations. So this is my take on foreign assistance provided to Palestine. And I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to put my views on Palestine. And thank you so much. I would especially thank everyone who are listening this presentation. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum. Free Palestine.
Waalaikumsalam.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sirajuddin, for your plain presentation. We really got more knowledge, and you are very inspiring with us and why we should and have to help Palestine. So there are several things that we can develop in our discussion as a result of the Dr. Sirajuddin presentation. But wait, before we discuss, now we will continue to our second speaker. Will be presented by Professor Saul Takahashi. He is a professor of human rights and peace studies in Osaka Jogakuin University. Hello, Professor. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Hello. I understand there's just a little bit of a technical issue here, so I'm not able to share the screen. You're not able to make me a co-host. So what I'm doing right now is I am typing in my, I'm going to send you my presentation so that you can show it. I'm sorry, it's just taking a little bit of, taking a few seconds here. Here, okay, now it should work. Let's see.
Okay, you can share, you can send the PowerPoint presentation to us and we will share the screen.
Yes, indeed. So inshallah, it's just, it'll do it, but because I'm doing it while we're speaking over Zoom, it's just taking a little bit of time for my computer to get everything sorted. But okay, it should, I should be able to do this in just a few seconds. I'm terribly sorry. Just bear with me. Okay, looks okay. Let's see.
Okay. Professor Takahashi will explain us about the mapping of international aid and the impact of the international assistance to Palestine. Since we know that there are many donors for Palestine, but some of us might not know from which country or which organization or persons that help Palestine much, and also what's the impact of this international aid so far for Palestine, especially in economic sector. So Professor Takahashi will explain us after this.
Right. I've just sent you the presentation, inshallah. I'm terribly sorry about this, but right. So perhaps I should just, have you got it yet?
Wait. Yes, we got the email already, and we will download and also the share screen. You can start it from now. Right. You have 25 minutes. Time is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. What is being shown on the screen? All right. Well, I received the sort of the concept note of this whole web. Thank you very much for this opportunity, first and foremost. I received the concept note for this webinar a couple of days ago, and I saw that one of the main questions that we were seeking to look at in this webinar was why is it that with all this international aid and with quite a bit of international aid pouring into Palestine, why is it that the occupation is continuing? Why is it that Palestinians remain under occupation by the Israelis? And of course, you know, the answer, in my mind, the answer to that is actually pretty simple. I mean, Palestine is a very complicated situation and there are all sorts of different factors. But at the end of the day, the international aid that is being given to Palestine isn't geared towards ending the occupation. That's not the objective in any way, shape, or form. And in actual fact, you could very well argue that the aid is aiming towards maintaining the occupation. At the very least, it certainly is not aiming towards Palestinian independence in any kind of meaningful way, or towards an end to the occupation. And so that's, I will go into a little bit about what international donors are there in Palestine and that kind of issue. But that's really the main background to everything that I'm going to be talking about. I don't know if is the presentation ready yet, or are you?
Well, we still download it, and after this we will share screen.
Right,
I'm
okay.
so sorry.
Well, it's no problem. I guess I'll just sort of start talking. I'll just go ahead. I think, it is important to recall, and of course everybody, I'm assuming that most of the people here today know this, but it is important to recall, I think that, the situation in Palestine is really a situation of colonization. And the previous speaker used, of course, mentioned the word apartheid, and I very much concur with that. I mean, there's no question about that. It is, here we go. Okay, well, there we are. It is a situation of colonization. If we could go to the next slide already, I'm sorry. So, if you look in the media and of course in sort of everyday jargon and parlance, we talk about the occupation, we talk about the conflict. If you look at the media, sometimes when there's a major Israeli offensive in Gaza, then they talk about a war in Gaza. And some of these are, legally and technically correct. I mean, it is an armed conflict. And in international law, at least, I'm an international lawyer, and we look at the situation certainly in 1967 as a situation of occupation. But really, it's a situation of colonization, and it's important to remember that. And if international aid is really going to be meaningful and effective in any sort of real way, then it has to address this root problem of colonization. It has to address the situation of Zionist colonization of the land of Palestine. Otherwise, it's just really what it is. It's just tinkering around with at the edges of the situation. Could you go to the next slide, please? Right. Okay. And then if you could keep on pressing. Yes. Okay. War, conflict, occupation. This is a little bit. This is just me highlighting what I just said. Okay. If you could go to the next slide, please. Right. I mean, we've all seen this map, many, many times. I'm sure many of us use the map in presentations of our own, and we're all very familiar with it. So I really don't think I need to spend too much time on what it means. But again, I just wanted to highlight what we're talking about here. And I was very happy to see the concept note of this webinar talking about occupation since 1948, because that is the accurate. That's the accurate way to look at the situation. You have this entire the land of Palestine, the country of Palestine, that has been occupied by Zionist forces since 1948, and then onward even more since 1967. However, when we talk about international aid in Palestine, generally, that entire concept tends to be based on 67. So we're looking at if you look at these maps, we're looking at the second map on the right. So from not the map on furthest on the right, but the one directly to the left of that. So basically the third map. Generally we're looking at what sort of international aid is given to Palestine within the land that was occupied by Israel in 1967. So we're looking at the West Bank, that includes East Jerusalem, of course, and we're looking at Gaza. And, that's the world we live in. And this is what, when we talk about international aid, that's really what we're talking about mainly. But it's important to recall that that's only that's only part of the picture. And not only is it part of the picture, but the picture itself is getting more and more worse for the Palestinian people. Okay, if you could please go to the next slide then. Could you press return twice then? If you could go, yes, okay, and then one more time. Thank you. This is just to stress, again, I think many of us already know this, but the situation in the West Bank, and I'm including East Jerusalem, of course, is quite different from the situation in Gaza. In West Bank, you have a situation where Israel is basically in direct control over the entire area. There are areas where there is very limited Palestinian autonomy. We all know this, the Palestinian Authority, now often called the Palestinian government or the government of the state of Palestine. But in practical terms, Israel can and does go into Area A and Area B at any time that they want. They do this. They go in to arrest people and they go in to shoot people sometimes. They do this as a matter of course when they feel like they can or they feel it's appropriate. So really the entirety of the West Bank is really under direct control of Israel. Land is being stolen on a daily basis, colonial settlement. And of course, in the background of all of this, we have the question of natural resources. I think the previous speaker already mentioned that a little bit. In particular, water resources are something that are very, very, very key in the West Bank. In the situation in Gaza is, of course, a little bit different because there are no Israeli colonies within Gaza. There are no Israeli troops actually stationed within Gaza. So it's more of a situation of remote control in a way. Of course, as has already been mentioned, fishermen from Gaza are prevented from going out and trying to earn their livelihood. When you go to Gaza, and I remember this very well, I remember the Israeli drones and aircraft always sort of flying overhead and hearing the buzz of the drones, all the time. So they control the airspace, they control the water, the sea right around it, all sorts of other things. I mean, mobile phone bandwidths are controlled by Israel. The population registry is controlled by Israel, everything. So it remains, certainly under international law, it does remain a situation of military occupation, just like the West Bank does. So could you go to the next slide, please? Again, I think most people are very familiar with this, but it's good to recall. Now, getting back to the question of international aid, I want to just look once again at the history and how, the historical background to this whole discussion. And we remember, if we look back at this, at the first Intifada that started in really 87, 88 is when people generally talk about the beginning of the first Intifada. It was at the time, there was no Palestinian Authority. The entirety of the West Bank and Gaza was directly controlled by Israel. And there was no Palestinian Authority. There was no facade of Palestinian autonomy or control. It just didn't exist. So, you had Israeli troops everywhere. Israelis controlled all the social services and the facilities. Everything was very much openly, directly controlled. And there was one could call a spontaneous uprising, in the sense that there was no organized leadership or single leadership to the first Intifada. It was very much coordinated in a way by locally based and democratically run resistance committees and local organizations. And these really involved all members of the community. I mean, there were women's committees, there were youth committees, there were all sorts of different committees and organizations to the first Intifada, and everything was run in a very democratically, in a very democratic way. The PLO, you remember, the PLO had been basically, driven out of Palestine, and so they were very much out of the picture. And to the leaders of the PLO, this was a worrying sign. I mean, they were, here they're walking around saying that they're the international representative of the Palestinian people. But what's actually happening in Palestine, they have very little control over, and they're not really in the picture. They're not really the leaders of the first Intifada. So this is one of the main impetuses that led to the Oslo Accords and the whole Oslo framework. Because the PLO, many leaders of the PLO wanting to regain control of the national movement, they essentially entered into an agreement with Israel, with the occupier. They agreed to abandon armed resistance. And I have to say, this is something that's practically unprecedented in the history of the world, where a national movement of a country that is being colonized, they go out of their way to abandon armed resistance to the occupier. This is not something that happens a lot, and it's not a step that one likes. So they do that in exchange for this limited autonomy in what is 22% of Palestine. So basically, they said we're giving up fighting for the entirety of our country. We're going to accept building a country only on what is 22% of what was originally our land. We'll do that, and we will do this through peaceful negotiations with the occupier. We will do this instead of fighting and trying to get what is our right. We are going to, enter into these negotiations and kind of hope that the occupier, by the goodwill of his heart, is going to give us, what is just. Now, you can imagine this was not going to go well, and of course, as we all know, it hasn't. But with the Oslo framework, with the advent of Oslo framework, that's really when international aid started pouring in to the Palestinian Authority and to Palestinian civil society. Up till then, there was international aid, but really with the Oslo framework, that's when the doors opened, and this huge gush of aid from international donors, and I'll in the next slide I'll show you what I'm talking about when I mean the international donors. But this really opened the doors, and what happened was the PA, the Palestinian Authority, basically became the subcontractor for the occupation. And we all know this. We all know about the security cooperation that the PA has with Israeli forces. And I, having been there for 5 years, I can tell you from my own personal experience, seeing this where the PA arrests Palestinians on behalf of the Israelis and imprison them in Palestinian prisons within the West Bank, and torture them and do all sorts of bad things. So this is the kind of thing that is going on right now as in the framework of security cooperation. The other thing that really started with the Oslo framework is, you remember those local committees that coordinated the first Intifada and really ran the resistance. Again, these were spontaneous, these were democratically run, and these were very grassroots civil society organizations. Now with Oslo and this huge gush of foreign money that started coming in, where we see this quote unquote professionalization of Palestinian NGOs. I mean, they're not resistance committees anymore, most of them. They're not, locally, democratically run grassroots organizations anymore. All of a sudden now we have these, we have NGOs, so to speak, ones that have lobbying, very sophisticated PR operations, lobbying operations in Geneva and New York. And you have this class of professional Palestinians that that get skilled in making presentations to get funds, and they know what the donors want, and they're part of this kind of circle of international aid, and this is how these kind of things are working. The other thing that is very, of course, relevant is the split that took place in 2007. And again, I think we're all very familiar with all of this, and so I'm not going to spend time on it. There was an election, and the United States and Europe and also the Israelis were looking, they were just sort of sitting there figuring that Fatah, the main party in the PA, was going to completely win hands down. And of course, that's not what happened. Hamas won in a free and fair election. There's been no kind of suggestion that the election was illegitimate, which is a far cry from places like the United States, of course. And so we have this, Hamas was voted in by the Palestinian people in 2006. Of course, the US, the Europeans, the Israelis obviously refused to accept this, because Hamas was not part of the Oslo framework. Hamas was not, in a formal sense, they have not abandoned armed resistance, and they have not abandoned, at least in a formal sense, the quest, the struggle for all of historical Palestine. So the US, the Europeans, they don't want to play with them, and they don't recognize their victory in the elections, and they assist Fatah to attack Hamas, and there is this small civil war. And in the end, what happens is Fatah is kicked out of Gaza and runs to the West Bank. And then we have Hamas running Gaza. So this split is also a very relevant issue in the background for when we talk about international aid. Okay, if you could please go to the next slide. Right, and could you here this is basically what I was talking about. Yes, okay, great, that's fine. So mapping, so to speak, all of the international aid that goes to Palestine would be, it would take certainly 90 minutes and probably much longer than that. But what I did want to do was just sort of give the general flow of how these kind of what quote unquote international aid, generally how it works. When you have the major international aid donors, and their governments. I mean, we're talking about governments. Obviously, the United States is a big one. I think the previous speaker already showed a slide of donors to UNRWA, and that's of course a big piece of the pie. But there are also there's other channels of aid as well. But the donors are the rich countries. I mean, the donors are the countries that we all know: the United States, the European Union as a sort of collective, and also individual EU states, Sweden, Germany, these kind of countries. My country, Japan, is also a very big, major donor in Palestine. And the money the funds that go, that are donated by governments, generally they are channeled through international organizations like the UN and like the World Bank, or through international NGOs. Sometimes they are Japan would give so many millions of dollars to a UN agency, and then that UN agency would in turn give that money to an international NGO, and then the international NGO in turn would give that money or use those funds to coordinate a project with the Palestinian Authority or with national NGOs. So it's a very sort of, I don't know if I'd call it convoluted, but it's a sort of a long chain where you have the national governments, the donor governments at the start, but generally, quite often, sometimes they fund things directly. They fund the PA directly. They can fund NGOs directly, but quite often they choose to fund things through the United Nations. And then the United Nations would choose to fund things through an international NGO that they work closely with. And the international NGO would then subcontract the project onto national NGOs or to the Palestinian Authority. So that's generally how these kind of things work. If you could please go to the next slide. Sorry, could you go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yes. Great. So, but and this is where I get back to the real point of what I've been saying and what I've been saying since the very beginning, which is that this aid, which comes from international donors, is based on the Oslo framework. It's based on the PA being the legitimate representative of the Palestinian national movement. So refugees who are not in Palestine, they're excluded. They don't count. Hamas, because it has not abandoned armed resistance and not agreed to settling with Israel for only 22% of Palestinian land, they are excluded. You have the situation where everything is based on the Oslo framework, which really is, going nowhere. So you have this international donors, and I say that in a general sense. I'm not including Arab countries here because that's a little bit of a different category. There are just a few European governments, the Swiss and the Norwegians, I'm thinking in particular, they are not part of the European Union. So they're not bound by European Union policy not to fund Hamas in any sort of way, shape, or form. But the major ones, you're talking the United States, Japan, the European Union, Hamas is completely excluded. And when I was working in the UN Human Rights Agency, we have an office in Gaza, and I was going there quite frequently, but we were not allowed to give any kind of aid to Hamas. We were not allowed to talk to them in any kind of formal way. We weren't even allowed to invite them to, for example, like, I don't know, a workshop on human rights or anything like that. I mean, we were just sort of like supposed to pretend that they didn't even exist. And this kind of thing is, you know, in the entire world, there really is no other situation where you have the United Nations in a conflict zone and they are not allowed to talk to all the parties. You know, there's no point of the UN being there if they can't, you know, talk to all the parties and try to sort of advance a peaceful solution, right? I mean, you know, how are we going to have a peaceful solution when we completely exclude the government of Gaza from any kind of discussions? And so it is this very sort of Kafkaesque, extremely strange situation here. I don't really have too much time anymore, but the Gaza reconstruction mechanism is certainly one really stark example of this. And this was set up after the military offensive in 2014, which was, you know, a complete catastrophe for Gaza, where, you know, thousands of people were massacred by the Israelis and the whole thing. And there was international aid that was pledged and given for the reconstruction of Gaza. Setting aside the question, okay, why is it that Israel, in complete violation of international law, you know, smashes and destroys half of Gaza, and why is it that they're not paying anything? So this is a completely separate issue. We have international aid coming to rebuild Palestinian houses in Gaza, but under this reconstruction mechanism, which the UN was essentially forced to implement, basically anybody connected with Hamas was not allowed aid. So any kind of aid to reconstruct their house or that kind of thing, if you were on this list of Hamas members, which of course conveniently was given to the UN by Israel, well, you were not eligible for this kind of aid. So, you know, this is just a very stark example of how Hamas is completely excluded from the entire framework. Aid to the PA is also completely based on compliance with Oslo, right? So that's mainly security cooperation with Israel. Most of the American aid, and the American aid, a lot of it goes to UNRWA, but most of the American aid that goes directly to the PA is security related. I mean, they're the ones that train Palestinian security forces. They're the ones that give them weapons and train them in how to use them and, you know, arrest people on behalf of Israel. Donors also demand that Palestinian NGOs be non-political. And here's where if you remember what I talked about the professionalization of Palestinian NGOs, you know, basically donors are imposing a sort of, if you like, a European model of how NGOs should be on Palestinian NGOs, right? So you have NGOs in like a European context it's expected that they're not political, that they base their actions only on standards of international law, which are supposedly completely neutral, right? So, you know, basically what that means is you have Palestinian NGOs that, you know, they're talking about international law and how, you know, this particular policy of Israel is in violation of this particular provision of human rights law. And that's fine, that's important, but you're missing the forest for the trees. You know, Palestinian NGOs that, for example, demand the right of return. Palestinian NGOs that demand that all of Palestinian land be returned to the Palestinian people. You know, these kind of organizations, well, they're just a little bit too political for us. You know, these kind of putting forward, advancing the Palestinian cause in a sort of nationalistic way are looked at as political, and they are also excluded in general from international funding. Finally, I just want to mention UNRWA, which is, of course, an extremely important organization, and it was made, you know, right after the Nakba, and it does great work, but UNRWA also, if you look at UNRWA, the mandate of UNRWA is to assist Palestinian refugees. Now, this is in stark contrast from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, which is the UN agency that deals with refugees aside from Palestinian refugees, right? UNHCR has the protection mandate. Their mandate is to protect people without international protection, to advocate for their human rights. Whereas UNRWA is very constrained in that way. They don't have this protection mandate. They only have the mandate for assistance, make sure that people can survive. But that's a different thing from advocating that their rights be protected. The people at UNRWA they do an amazing job, and they try their best to do this kind of advocacy. But there's always these constraints and some donors, especially the United States, they've always been looking at and making sure that UNRWA doesn't cross certain lines. Okay, if you could go to the next slide, please. I know that I'm already sort of over my time now, but I'm going to finish. If you could please go to the next slide, then yes. Okay, great. Thank you. So, what the result is that Palestine becomes, it's not a human rights issue anymore. It's not an issue that requires a political solution. It's not an issue that requires human rights accountability and, justice for past violations. No, it becomes a humanitarian issue. Like it's nobody, like some kind of natural disaster. It's nobody's fault. And this is a real problem in Palestine when we see this sort of humanitarianization of aid to Palestine. It is a humanitarian emergency in many ways, yes. And when Gaza, you have these houses destroyed and things need to be rebuilt, yes, of course, there are humanitarian aspects. But at the core, this is not a humanitarian emergency. This is a human rights emergency. This is an emergency that requires, proper human rights accountability. And that tends to get sort of shunted away in the whole Oslo framework. And once again, like I said, again, Palestinian NGOs are forced to be non-political. And the whole result is that, the aid that goes to Palestinian people, this aid, a lot of the aid is done on the basis of the priorities of the donors and of the priorities set under the Oslo framework, which is not working for the Palestinian people. And so here you have the situation where, the aid that they really need to receive, they're not getting. Could you please press return, and then I'll have these final sort of concluding words here at the bottom of this slide, which I did this animation here. Right. No, sorry. Next slide. Sorry. This is good. Yes. Okay. Great. So okay. Yes. Okay. NEA should focus. Yes. Okay. Great. This is great. There is more. If people are interested in this kind of issue, these are some sources which I recommend that you look at. This is not my book. I wish it was. If it was my book, I'd be bragging about it from the beginning. But it's an excellent book, and it's one of several books. More and more researchers are looking into this issue. There's also a more recent one called From the River to the Sea that looks at the whole Oslo framework and how it's basically dead, and how political decision makers in the international community, they need to accept that. They need to accept that Oslo is dead, and what are we going to do from now? Aid Watch Palestine is a very good organization. Again, they look at aid that is given from international donors to Palestinians, and how this is not done on the basis of what Palestinians actually need and require. Okay, could you go on the next slide, please? We're just finishing up. I'm just finishing up. I'm very sorry. Oh, next one, please. Yes, okay. I just wanted the last. Could you please go back? Well, okay, well, we'll stay here. There was a picture. Yes, there you go. There's a picture of Al-Aqsa, Al-Rahman Sharif. Alhamdulillah. I'm just saying this because I know that, of course, Indonesia has no relations with Israel. So in a sort of, theoretically, it's not possible for Indonesians to visit Palestine, because all the borders are controlled by the Israelis. However, I know, and of course, we all know that there are ways of actually getting into Palestine. And one of a very common way is some tours which are organized in cooperation with, sometimes with Israeli tour companies. things. And I've done a lot of speaking on this kind of issue in Malaysia, for example, and it's the same kind of situation. And I do want to, I know there's debate about this and whether it's appropriate for us as Muslims to visit Al-Haram al-Sharif in this kind of situation. There people have different opinions, and I think that's fine. What I do want to say, and I want to implore on everybody who's listening today, I personally think it's good. I mean, if you can visit, then alhamdulillah, I mean, I think it would be a good thing to visit. But what I do implore you is, if you do visit, then visit with a view towards seeing how bad things are. Keep your eyes open and see what's happening to Palestinians on a daily basis. And I say that because, as we all know, I mean, some people go and they take selfies with Israeli soldiers in Al-Aqsa, and they talk about how, Israel's a clean country and it's really nice and people are nice and all this kind of nonsense. And I'm saying, that's exactly why the Israelis are more than happy to organize these kind of tours. And they're more than happy in trying to sell people on their narrative. And as we see, with what's going on with normalization in some countries, despicable, I have to say, this is all part of this kind of picture. And Israel does they go to great lengths to do these kind of PR campaigns. So do please be careful. I mean, if you visit, then do please just keep your eyes open and visit with a view towards returning to Indonesia or wherever you're from, and spreading the word about what's really happening in Palestine and how Palestinians are oppressed, and their every single internationally recognized human right is being violated on a daily basis. Okay, so the next slide is really my concluding slide, but if you could just go to the next slide, then everybody will see my email. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm sorry for taking a bit too long, but thank you very much, and I look forward to a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Professor Takahashi. Yes, we hope that we can visit Al-Aqsa one day and seeing it free. I mean, not under control by the occupation state. Yes, thank you so much. After listening the presentation of Professor Takahashi, we can find out that the impact of the international assistance to Palestine is immense, but there's major conflict inside. There are many donors that Palestine is reframed as a humanitarian issue. Hamas excluded from the aid. Palestinians are unable to receive aid they really need. But we need to remind that any aid should focus on true Palestinians' need. Now we will continue to third speaker, but before we continue to Bapak Niko Adam, I will give some bahasa Indonesia about our webinar today. Jadi, tema kali ini adalah bantuan internasional untuk Palestina, dan dari Dr. Siraj waktu di awal menjelaskan bahwa bantuan internasional sudah masuk ke dalam Palestina itu sejak 1948, dan sejak Oslo Accord yang ditandatangani secara resmi pada tanggal 13 September 93 berisi ketentuan penting tentang masalah ekonomi dan bantuan internasional. Jadi bantuan antara tahun 1993 dan 2004 banyak sekali dari Amerika Serikat ada 9 miliar dolar, kemudian tahun-tahun berikutnya bantuan ada 15 miliar dolar. Namun pada tahun 2009 para donor gagal memberikan bantuan kepada Palestina. Konferensi Paris mereka gagal sebanyak 7,7 miliar. Kemudian konferensi Mesir sebanyak 4,5 miliar. Dan banyak lagi kalau di total adalah 14 miliar dolar. Dan kita tahu pada tahun 2018 pemotongan dana Amerika Serikat sejak Trump menjadi presiden itu adalah serangan yang keji terhadap bangsa Palestina, karena kita semua tahu bahwa bangsa Palestina selama ini mengandalkan bantuan internasional. Dan banyak isu-isu yang Dr. Siraj tadi sampaikan, termasuk dugaan politik. Mereka bilang UNRWA dan USAID itu berkontribusi pada tanda kutip terorisme, bahwa militan Palestina yang mungkin disebut beberapa orang adalah pejuang Palestina menggunakan fasilitas UNRWA di tepi barat dan Gaza, dan juga staf UNRWA seringkali bersimpati dan bekerja sama dengan Hamas. Namun yang ditegaskan oleh Dr. Siraj adalah mengapa kita perlu membantu Palestina? Mengapa bantuan internasional sangat diperlukan oleh Palestina? Karena bahkan setelah 72 tahun Nakba, lebih dari 5 juta rakyat Palestina bergantung pada bantuan UNRWA. Maka mengapa kita harus membantu Palestina? Karena masih ada pendudukan, masih ada krisis pengungsi dan imperialisme. Menurut Human Rights Watch, pemerintah Israel terus memberlakukan pembatasan yang parah dan diskriminasi terhadap hak asasi warga Palestina. Kita sudah tahu hal tersebut. Kemudian untuk Profesor Takahashi, beliau menyampaikan bahwa bantuan itu sebagai alat untuk mempertahankan penindasan. Di Gaza banyak bantuan masuk, tapi tetap dikontrol oleh Israel. Kita melihat banyak nelayan yang ditembaki, kemudian mereka dilarang untuk melaut, kemudian setiap hari ada drone yang melayang sepanjang waktu di Gaza. Kemudian beliau menyampaikan donor bantuan internasional utama itu dari Amerika Serikat, kemudian turun ke PBB, Badan Dunia, kemudian LSM Internasional. Tapi para donor internasional itu mengecualikan Hamas dari bantuan apapun. Jadi PBB tidak mengizinkan kontak apapun. Pernah mendengar bahwa Gaza akan dibangun tapi Hamas tidak boleh terlibat. Maka bantuan itu dialihkan ke otoritas Palestina yang mempunyai koordinasi keamanan dengan Israel, meskipun masih patuh dengan kesepakatan Oslo. Jadi hasilnya adalah Palestina itu menurut presentasi Profesor Takahashi, Palestina itu dikemas sebagai masalah kemanusiaan. Konflik di Palestina itu nggak ada salah siapapun. Jadi tidak ada yang membutuhkan akuntabilitas hak asasi manusia dan solusi politik. Sedangkan LSM Palestina dipaksa untuk menjadi non-politik. Padahal LSM di Palestina itu menuntut untuk right to return atau Palestina menuntut hak untuk kembali. Jadi intinya warga Palestina tidak dapat menerima bantuan apapun yang mereka butuhkan. Itu adalah gambaran dari dua presentasi dari dua narasumber tersebut. Jika ada teman-teman yang ingin mengajukan pertanyaan kepada dua narasumber tersebut. Sekarang kita akan lanjut ke narasumber yang ketiga. Narasumber yang ketiga adalah Bapak Niko Adam. Assalamualaikum Bapak Niko.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Beliau adalah mantan pelaksana fungsi Palestina KBRI Aman. Beliau akan menyampaikan tentang peran Indonesia dalam bantuan internasional bagi Palestina. Seperti yang kita tahu tadi bahwa Indonesia dan Palestina memiliki hubungan historis yang berkaitan erat, bahkan hingga sekarang layaknya saudara jauh, dan di dunia internasional seperti PBB, Indonesia sangat berperan aktif dalam mendukung kemerdekaan Palestina. Dan sekarang kita akan mengetahui seberapa besar peran Indonesia dalam bantuan internasional ke Palestina, dan sebenarnya jenis bantuan apa saja yang telah diberikan untuk rakyat Palestina dari Indonesia. Mengingat bahwa banyak bantuan yang sering dan banyak diekspos ke masyarakat adalah bantuan kemanusiaan. Tidak berlama-lama, mari kita dengarkan paparan dari Bapak Niko tentang peran Indonesia dalam bantuan internasional bagi Palestina. Waktu kami persilahkan Bapak.
Terima kasih Mbak Nini. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Very good morning to all Palestinian friends in this forum. Brother Dr. Sirajuddin and Brother Professor Takahashi. How are you? Yeah, it's good to have your views and experience and share with us in Indonesia.
Thank you.
In this occasion, that I would like to share, like Mbak Anini said before, the information related to the topic discussed. Based on my experience while serving at the Indonesian Embassy in Amman, and also cover state of Palestine from the beginning of 2016 until the mid year of 2019. And all of this is my personal capacity. In this case, I will discuss my material, the presentation entitled "The Role of Non-State Actors in Implementing Indonesian Humanitarian Diplomacy to Palestine." But Professor Takahashi and Dr. Sirajuddin allow me to speak in Bahasa in my presentation.
Okay, thank you. You may proceed.
Yes, thank you. I will share my presentation. I will check. Can you get it? Yes. Why not appear? It's not appear here. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. This is my presentation about presentasi saya tentang peran aktor negara dalam pelaksanaan diplomasi kemanusiaan Indonesia untuk Palestina. Terkait dengan perkembangan aktor non-negara saat ini merupakan salah satu wujud dinamika politik luar negeri saat ini yang cukup menarik perhatian, di mana peran aktor non-negara semakin meningkat. Disengaja ataupun tidak, hal ini telah membentuk aktor baru yang beroperasi dalam lingkup global, regional maupun global. Poin utamanya adalah masing-masing aktor diharapkan dapat bersinergi bersama dalam menyelesaikan masalah atau isu yang terkait. Kemudian demikian juga dalam pelaksanaan politik luar negeri Indonesia, di mana peran aktor non-negara dalam kebijakan luar negeri sangat mendukung pencapaian kepentingan nasional Indonesia di fora internasional. Peran dan partisipasi aktor non-negara dalam hubungan luar negeri sudah diakui oleh pemerintah. Hal ini telah dimuat di dalam Undang-Undang Nomor 37 Tahun 1999 tentang hubungan luar negeri, di mana pasal 1 menyebutkan bahwa hubungan luar negeri selain dilakukan oleh pemerintah juga dilakukan oleh aktor non-negara, yaitu seperti badan usaha, organisasi politik, organisasi masyarakat, lembaga swadaya masyarakat, dan juga warga negara Indonesia. Kemudian kita coba lihat peran aktor non-negara dalam diplomasi kemanusiaan. Peran aktor non-negara dalam mendukung pelaksanaan diplomasi kemanusiaan Indonesia, baik di kancah domestik maupun internasional, sudah banyak terlihat. Seperti dalam membantu korban-korban bencana alam di berbagai negara, krisis kemanusiaan, maupun juga krisis pengungsian terjadi di Rohingya dan juga di Palestina. Khusus pelaksanaan diplomasi kemanusiaan untuk negara Palestina dilakukan seiring dengan dukungan Indonesia terhadap kemerdekaan Palestina yang sudah merupakan amanat konstitusi dan wujud kesungguhan dukungan terhadap resolusi PBB terkait Palestina. Sehingga posisi Indonesia ini sudah sangat kuat, jelas, dan konsisten. Indonesia berkomitmen memberikan dukungan kepada bangsa Palestina, baik itu meliputi dukungan politik, ekonomi, sosial, dan juga kemanusiaan. Dalam di sini saya juga akan share tentang dukungan non politis Indonesia kepada Palestina. Dukungan Indonesia kepada negara Palestina itu kita berikan dalam beberapa mekanisme. Yang pertama adalah kerjasama dengan Badan PBB UNRWA. Yang kedua, bekerjasama dengan di bawah mekanisme NASP, New ASEAN African Strategic Partnership. Yang ketiga, kerjasama di bawah mekanisme SEAPAD, Conference on Cooperation among East Asian Countries for Palestinian Development. Mekanisme ketiga ini merupakan inisiasi Jepang dan Indonesia. Yang keempat adalah melalui kerjasama bilateral. Keempat mekanisme ini, kerjasama ini semuanya bertujuan untuk meningkatkan kapasitas sumber daya manusia Palestina. Kira-kira berapa program yang sudah diimplementasikan kepada Palestina? Ini terdapat angka-angka realisasi dari program bantuan Indonesia kepada Palestina dari tahun 2008 sampai pertengahan tahun ini 2020 itu yang kami catat Indonesia sudah telah memberikan bantuan sebanyak 178 program, 178 kegiatan, dan ini nilainya sekitar 8,9 juta dolar. Ke 178 program ini diserap oleh lebih kurang 2.000 sumber daya manusia Palestina yang siap membangun negara, yaitu negaranya, yaitu tepatnya 1989. 178 program tersebut itu mencakup bidang UKM, pendidikan kebudayaan, termasuk juga sekolah diplomatik, pemberdayaan perempuan, kesehatan, infrastruktur, penanganan bencana, energi, pertanian, dan lain-lain. Semua program 178 program ini pemerintah Indonesia laksanakan di tempatnya di Indonesia dan juga di Jordan serta di Palestina. Kemudian kita juga lihat diplomasi kemanusiaan Indonesia untuk Palestina. Selama posting saya hampir 4 tahun di Jordan yang juga merangkap negara Palestina, KBRI Aman telah memfasilitasi dan mencatat penyaluran bantuan Indonesia kepada rakyat Palestina, baik yang berada di tepi barat, jalur Gaza, maupun pengungsi Palestina yang berada di Jordan. Bantuan kemanusiaan tersebut berasal dari institusi pemerintah Republik Indonesia, lembaga swadaya masyarakat, NGOs, maupun perorangan filantropis yang dicatat dan dibantu penyalurannya oleh KBRI Aman. Adapun nilai yang kami fasilitasi itu lebih kurang 6 juta dolar. Kemudian kita lihat bantuan yang terkumpul atau yang telah disalurkan sebesar 6 juta dolar tadi, ini sumber dananya kami mencatatnya kami bagi dalam 2 kategori. Yang pertama dari bantuan pemerintah Indonesia itu lebih kurang 2,7 juta dolar atau 44,47%. Sedangkan sisanya itu lebih kurang 3,3 juta dolar atau 55,53%. Ini merupakan bantuan dari masyarakat Indonesia. Bantuan dari masyarakat Indonesia inilah mereka ini adalah bisa disebut sebagai aktor non negara yang saya jelaskan di depan tadi, yaitu mulai dari NGO, filantropis, lembaga akademis, dan juga mahasiswa, seniman, dai, ustadz, dan juga sahabat Palestina. Semua bantuan tadi yang 6 juta tadi itu kita salurkan melalui dua channel, dua saluran. Yang pertama lebih kurang 2,4 juta US dollar atau sebesar 39,90% itu disalurkan melalui UNRWA, dan 3,6 juta US dollar atau sebesar 60,10% itu disalurkan langsung kepada rakyat Palestina dan juga melalui JHCO. JHCO ini yaitu Jordan Hashemite Charity Organization. Kenapa kami lebih mengutamakan penyaluran melalui UNRWA? Karena seperti yang dijelaskan oleh Profesor Takahashi tadi, UNRWA merupakan badan PBB yang dibentuk pada 1 Mei 1950 yang mempunyai mandat untuk memastikan pemenuhan hak-hak dasar bagi pengungsi Palestina. Operasional mereka khususnya di bidang kesehatan, pendidikan, dan sosial, baik kepada pengungsi Palestina yang ada di tepi barat, di Jordan, Gaza, Suriah, dan Lebanon. Mungkin dari tabel yang ada di bawah bisa dilihat bahwa UNRWA itu menangani pengungsi Palestina di kelima negara tadi, itu totalnya berjumlah 5,6 juta. Yang paling besar tentunya di Jordan, yang mana 5,6 juta tadi pengungsi Palestina tersebut berada di 58 camp yang tersebar. Seperti saya sampaikan di atas tadi, bahwa fokus dari UNRWA tadi adalah di sektor pendidikan dan kesehatan. Di sektor pendidikan, UNRWA mempunyai sekolah lebih kurang 711 sekolah. 711 sekolah ini mereka sekolahnya dari grade 1 sampai grade 11. Sedangkan grade 12 itu diusahakan anak-anak sekolah tadi masuk ke sekolah lokal. Sedangkan murid yang bisa belajar di sekolah UNRWA tadi itu lebih kurang 540.613 murid. Sedangkan di sektor kesehatan, UNRWA mempunyai klinik yang tersebar di 5 tempat, yaitu sebanyak 141 klinik. Yang mana klinik tersebut dikunjungi oleh pasien, tentunya pengungsi Palestina. Setiap tahun itu rata-ratanya 8,3 juta pengungsi. Sedangkan tadi mengapa bantuan masyarakat Indonesia tersebut juga banyak kami salurkan melalui JHCO. JHCO merupakan suatu lembaga non-profit yang langsung diorganisir dan dibimbing langsung di bawah Raja Jordan. Ini didirikan tahun 1990. Mereka merupakan lembaga kemanusiaan yang beroperasi membantu negara-negara yang terdampak konflik, baik itu bencana alam maupun kemiskinan maupun konflik politik. Dan JHCO ini mempunyai mandat untuk mengkoordinasi upaya tanggap kemanusiaan, mengelola dana dari donor nasional dan juga internasional, dan membangun dukungan logistik yang sesuai untuk dikirimkan merupakan dalam bentuk bantuan kemanusiaan ke daerah-daerah yang terkena dampak di seluruh dunia. Bagi pengungsi Palestina, baik itu yang ada di Jordan maupun di tepi barat dan juga jalur Gaza, ini JHCO ini merupakan satu-satunya lembaga yang langsung dimandatkan untuk menerima dan menyalurkan. Jadi di Jordan itu tidak ada lembaga resmi lainnya yang boleh menerima dan juga menyalurkan bantuan internasional untuk ke pengungsi selain dari UNRWA tadi. Kemudian JHCO ini dalam operasionalnya banyak bidangnya, berbagai macam bidang sesuai dengan apa yang diinginkan oleh donatur. Apabila kita ingin meminta JHCO menyalurkan bantuan, itu mereka akan menyesuaikan menchannelkan kepada NGO kecil di bawahnya yang mempunyai keahlian tertentu. Jadi kalau misalnya kita mempunyai amanah dari donatur di dalam negeri ingin membantu sarana kesehatan, maka JHCO menchannelkan LSM atau NGO di Jordan yang beroperasi di sektor kesehatan untuk melakukannya, seperti klinik dan juga rumah sakit. Hal ini seperti yang pengalaman yang sudah dilakukan oleh Basnas, Badan Amil Zakat Nasional Indonesia. Basnas pada beberapa waktu lalu sangat memperhatikan sektor kesehatan, maka Basnas kami channelkan dengan JHCO. Kemudian JHCO langsung menghubungkan dengan klinik yang berada di kamp pengungsi untuk berhubungan dengan Basnas. Maka Basnas membangun beberapa klinik seperti klinik mata, klinik THT, dan juga klinik gigi. Itu operasional sehari-harinya itu dilakukan oleh klinik yang di bawah JHCO tadi. Begitu juga untuk sektor pendidikan, Basnas juga ada membantu di sektor pendidikan. Selain itu juga Basnas juga bekerja sama dengan UNRWA juga dalam penyaluran bantuan. Jumlah bantuan kemanusiaan dari masyarakat Indonesia kami yakini masih banyak lagi yang belum tercatat oleh Kabir Aman. Karena beberapa NGO Indonesia diketahui memberikan bantuan kemanusiaan kepada rakyat Palestina, langsung kepada rakyat Palestina, atau bekerja sama dengan mitra lokal atau NGO lokal di Palestina, ataupun melalui mitra internasional yang umumnya berasal dari Turki. Dan tentunya mereka tidak melaporkan pada perwakilan RI di luar negeri, termasuk KBRI Yaman. Terkait hal ini, KBRI Yaman senantiasa memberikan sosialisasi kepada LSM atau NGO di Indonesia agar apabila ingin memberikan bantuan kepada pengungsi Palestina, baik yang berada di Suriah atau di luar Jordan ataupun pengungsi Palestina yang berada di dalam wilayah Palestina, hendaknya dapat memanfaatkan keberadaan perwakilan Republik Indonesia di luar negeri termasuk KBRI Yaman yang siap memfasilitasi dan menjembatani maksud bantuan kemanusiaan tadi yang diberikan baik oleh teman-teman secara perorangan maupun kelembagaan atau NGO. Hal ini guna menghindarkan terjadinya kerjasama dengan mitra-mitra yang kurang tepat, yang akhirnya bantuan yang merupakan amanah itu tidak sampai kepada yang berhak menerimanya. Terakhir, sosialisasi dan ajakan atau seruan yang diarahkan kepada semua lapisan masyarakat di Indonesia sebagai bagian dari diplomasi kemanusiaan yang dijalankan oleh KBRI Yaman. Selama 4 tahun kami bertugas di sana, sudah terlihat hasilnya, di mana beberapa kalangan masyarakat, dermawan, NGO, kampus, dan juga organisasi masyarakat sipil termasuk seniman telah terlihat berpartisipasi sebagai aktor non negara dalam pelaksanaan diplomasi kemanusiaan untuk pengungsi Palestina. Demikian pandangan kami atau sedikit informasi terkait dengan diplomasi atau peran non-actors dalam diplomasi kemanusiaan Indonesia untuk Palestina. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Bapak Niko. Dari paparan tersebut kita bisa mengetahui bahwa Indonesia sangat berperan besar dalam bantuan internasional untuk Palestina. Meskipun kita belum masuk ya menjadi peringkat atas pendonor, namun alhamdulillah dan insya Allah akan konsisten. Tidak hanya seputar kemanusiaan saja, kan, tetapi juga ternyata banyak program-program lainnya. Ada 178 program yang diserap, hampir 2.000 SDM di Palestina untuk membangun Palestina dan mempersiapkan kemerdekaan Palestina insya Allah. Jadi kita mungkin langsung ke sesi tanya jawab karena waktu sudah menunjukkan pukul 11:30. Okay, now we will go ahead and take some time for questions. Just a reminder, please be sure to type your questions into the questions box. It looks like that we have several questions. The questions are from the member of CDC Al Sharq, and for your information that inshallah that CDC Al Sharq will hold the webinar service every month, and we will write a policy paper according from this discussion. Now I will read. First question is from Brother Agung for Dr. Siraj. Dr. Siraj. Dr. Shiraz, are you still there? Hello, Dr. Shiraz, is a question for you. You mentioned to us that there are several challenges on ground regarding to the aid programs to Palestinians. In your opinion, how the international community should do to solve these obstacles? It's a question.
Thank you for the wonderful question. Obviously, we have seen in the last 2 decades, the international aid programs as working right now is not ameliorating the conditions of refugees or Palestinian people in the occupied Palestinian land. This is a truth. And as far as the international community is concerned, people at large are very concerned about the happenings, the political churnings which is happening right now as far as Palestine is concerned. I have initially said there are many institutional structures like United Nations Relief Work Agency, especially for Palestinian people. Then there are many private donors, NGOs, as Professor Saul Tahakashi, Professor Saul was saying, informal NGO, professional NGOs working. All these institutions are facing difficulties on ground, given the fact that the nature of interface between various actors in the occupied zones are very similar historically. Look, you should not take a framework of aid program in a procedural democracy and replicate the same in militarized zone. I can give you an example an example from Kashmir. Jammu and Kashmir in South Asia is one of the contested zone, and we know that for more than 1 year, internet has been shut off, and people's movement are restricted. For 1 year, the school children could not attend school, and economy lost its viability. Millions of money which used to come to the local economy, self-reliant local economy, has been lost because of intense militarization. So what is international or humanitarian aid for Jammu and Kashmir is concerned is very true for Palestine as well. So I'm trying to say that the social indicators, what we are intending to provide to the people in militarized zones, the social indicators, the medical indicators, the indicators of the development cannot come out by a comprehensive understanding of how militarized zones works. It's an occupation. So you have to politically deal with it. So now we have various organizations. We have United Nations and its subsidiary organizations, including the organizations discussed by Professor Saul and especially me, and Nico Adam has also elucidated the data from his experience I was watching. So what I am trying to say is that we should also politically start pressurizing. The BDS movement is obviously an example. So nothing is less. Wherever we are, one of the primary objective of organizing a program like this, to discuss an issue which is far from our continent and which has very intrinsic importance to our political question of sustainability and peace, is very well part of the answer of your question. So I suggest that we should try to bring more political consciousness. As Professor Saul was saying, that the shift from political question to humanitarian question, and from humanitarian question to human rights emergency, all these shifts are happening due to the lack of political consciousness, which we are not able to build up at critical times. And at this point of right-wing populism, where leaders like Donald Trump and Narendra Modi are inflicting frenzy political ideologies around the world, I request everyone that we should strive to build a positive political ideology which would address humanitarian crisis, such like that of Rohingya, Palestinian people, the question of Indian Muslims or Kashmiris. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Siraj. It's very close if we compare the Palestinian issue to the Kashmir. That's you're right. Now I will write another question from Brotherly Bus to Professor Takahashi. You mentioned earlier Palestine situation is reframed as humanitarian issues. So how will be the future design of the occupied Palestine? Is it yours, Professor Takahashi?
Right. Okay. Thank you. I mean, the question of what the future holds for Palestine is, it's a key one. And of course, and I noticed that there was a couple of other questions which are a little bit related to this about the two-state solution. The two-state solution is dead. I mean, I think there's really very little question about that amongst serious people who are looking at this. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And the reasons for that are mainly because the Israelis were never interested. The whole two-state solution was put forward by the international community and was always based on a fundamental injustice towards the Palestinian people. basically we had you remember those 4 maps that I showed towards the beginning of my presentation. You had the entire country, over 90% of it was owned by Palestinians. You had 2/3 of the population were Palestinians. And so the UN sort of swans in and says, well, why don't you guys split your country half and half? And so already, that's already a betrayal of the Palestinian people already then and there. And so the entire 2-state solution, and then we went on and goes on to the Oslo framework. The Israelis were never interested in a 2-state solution. I don't think they couldn't care less. I mean, the entire Oslo framework and the entire Israeli negotiating strategy appears to have been, just keep on negotiating and stalling for time while they colonize Palestinian land more and more. I mean, ever since the Oslo Accords, there's just been an explosion in colonization and Israeli colonizers living in Palestine. So, I mean, from the point of view of both, well, from the point of view of the Palestinians, of course, the 2-state solution was always unjust. From the point of view of, what's really happening on the ground, the Israelis have made sure we were far past the point when any kind of serious sort of 2-state solution that would result in a meaningful state for the Palestinian people on just a portion of the Palestinian land, we're far past the point where that is possible. I mean, Israeli colonization, settlements everywhere, apartheid roads that Palestinians are barred from using most of the time. I mean, it's as a practical matter, pretty much impossible because we're looking at 700,000 Jewish Israelis living in colonial settlements scattered out through the West Bank. So, so now what's happening is serious people are starting to realize, well, this 2-state solution thing is kind of dead in the water. Well, let's start looking at the 1-state solution. And, I don't want to sort of drone on about this, but the 1-state solution is the idea of, reverting back to a situation where the entire country of Palestine basically belongs to both people. And the Palestinian struggle for national liberation and for their own state shifts to sort of like a civil rights movement for equality within one country. Now, my strong feeling is that I'm not Palestinian. So I really don't think that I have the right to say which of these is better and which of these is more just. I think that should be a decision made by Palestinians, not by the likes of me. But I do feel strongly that the whole this notion that okay, we'll have one state, and of course the Israelis, they've wanted one state from the beginning. They've wanted it all for themselves. I mean, that's their idea of the one state. So when we talk about the one state and the one democratic state, as it's often referred to, we really have to be careful that we don't slip into the trap of just basically another expanded Israel, and the apartheid regime becomes even more and more entrenched. I mean, that's what Israel wants. I mean, that's clear. And that's always been clear. And now it's even more clear because, people like Netanyahu stated openly, we want the whole land and we're not going to, why should we allow Palestinian civil rights? That's open. I mean, there's never been any question of this really, except I guess in sort of limited time periods. And that's, we're long past that. So we have to make sure that any kind of one democratic state framework that we're talking about, first of all, it should really be Palestinians at the core, that Palestinians decide what the one state looks like, not the Israeli government and not the quote unquote international community with their bright ideas. What should happen is the Palestinians have to be sort of at the center of debate as to what the one democratic state should look like. And, we really have to make sure that there is there's serious accountability for all the violations that have already taken place. I mean, we look at the colonial settlements that are, scattered all over the West Bank. Now, it cannot be, all of these are on stolen Palestinian land. All of these, every single one they are based on, they're on stolen Palestinian land. Palestinians have been driven from their homes to build these colonial settlements. I mean, that's each and every single one of them is built on that. And you have 700,000 Jewish Israelis living in houses built on stolen Palestinian land in the West Bank, for example, right? So, does the one democratic state just say, okay, well, now let's just let bygones be bygones and then everybody can live where they want? Now, already in a very immediate sense, that's clearly unfair because, first of all, these colonial settlements are open only to Jews. So what does that mean? Okay, Palestinians will be allowed to buy homes. Well, how many Palestinians can afford a home in an Israeli settlement? Not too many. Okay, well, so what is, okay, well, maybe we should have subsidies so that Palestinians can buy homes in Israeli. So wait a minute, all of these are built on stolen Palestinian. Why aren't we talking about, maybe all of these should be evacuated and given back to the initial, to the people who owned the land on which they're built. This kind of talk really has to be center of any kind of one democratic state. I think there's a very strong danger that advocacy for the one democratic state is fine, and obviously most of the people are doing it with all the best of intentions, but we really have to be careful that any kind of one democratic state that we're talking about ensures that past violations are addressed, and that the people, aggrieved people who have had their rights violated, that they're able to access a serious remedy for that. And without that, this kind of, injustice is just going to continue. So I hope that makes sense, what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you, Professor Takahasi, for the plain explanation. It seems like that we still have some questions to be covered. Is it okay to all speakers to answer the questions because the time is limited? Is it okay if I keep
I'm
reading?
fine, sure, that's fine for me. Yes.
How is Dr. Sirajuddin and Bapak Niko?
Yep.
Is it okay?
Okay, please.
Okay, the next one, the questions is from Eno, from National Radio of Indonesia, RRI, has question to all speakers due to the limited time. Please all speakers answer the question just for a minute if you don't mind. The question is, in the general debate in the 75th UN General Assembly, President Mahmoud Abbas said the world just watching of the sacrifice of Palestinians and as it getting worse by the normalization of UAE and Bahrain with Israel. The question is, what exactly the world can give its support to help Palestine and its people to get the independence and lasting peace? What about the role of the two-state solution as the solution for the peace in Palestine line? And maybe Bapak Niko will answer first, and then Dr. Siraj, and the last one is Professor Takahasi. Time is yours.
Yes. For the Indonesian support for Palestinian independence, this is already the constitutional mandate. That's why this is a form for a serious support to all the UN resolution related to Palestine. This Indonesian's positions is very strong, clear and consistent. Like our President Jokowi has already said during the General Assembly this week, we heard together. Indonesia is committed to provide support to the Palestinian people, including political, economic, social, and humanitarian diplomacy. That's from my views.
Okay, thank you. Next is Dr. Sirajuddin.
My simple answer would be, as people who are supporting democracy and human rights around the world, we are sadly witnessing the normalization drive being carried out by Arab regimes in Middle East with apartheid state Israel, which is highly condemnable. In future, as Professor Saul Takahashi has stated, other regimes might also fall into the line of Israel. We have to oppose all these moves. What all we can do is that to fight for global justice. We are witnessing various struggles of intersectionality. When this movement of normalization started in Middle East, we have seen just before that there was the issue of annexation. People around the world protested against the annexation plan of Israel in West Bank, and we have seen the people, Black Lives Matter movement people, taking a lead in standing in solidarity with Palestinian people. So we could see that during George Floyd movement there was a sign of intersectionality. So I appeal my friends and colleagues who all are concerned with human rights and concerned with the plight of Palestinian refugees and Palestinian people for that matter. Stand up for human rights, and we should not leave hope. Good days are coming. We shall hope for that. Free Palestine.
Thank you so much. Free Palestine. And the next one, Professor Saul Takahashi.
Thank you very much. That's a very difficult act to follow. And in fact, I believe everything I wanted to say has already been said. I really do think I think the question of intersectionality is so key to Palestine because, like you already mentioned, the question, Black Lives Matter and, all of these other grassroots movements that are happening all over the world. Kashmir, of course. I mean, all of these places that are under oppression and where people are trying to rise up. They're all of these situations are very much interconnected, and I think those kind of connections are finally beginning to be recognized. Even before the current wave of protests in the United States, it was a number of years ago. This all sort of started in Baltimore and all these cities, and already there were links between the protesters in the United States and people protesting in Gaza and also in the West Bank. And we were seeing tweets from people in Palestine giving advice to American protesters on how to deal with tear gas, that kind of thing. And of course, Black Lives Matter, many prominent figures have been very proactive in advocating for the Palestinian cause as well. So, all of this is very important. And I do think, it seems like these are very dark days, and in many ways they are. But certainly we must make sure that we don't lose hope. And in human rights, one thing that you learn is that you must never lose hope, because certainly, inshallah, justice will triumph in the end. And really, I think what we're seeing is a situation right now all over the world where oppressed peoples and just people in general are rising up against against oppression and against the ruling class all over the place. Like in the UAE, for example, and some of the other countries that are pushing forward normalization with Israel, this is just the elite political class that is bulldozing this forward because they think that Israel is the way to get on good terms with Washington, and in the United States, you see this as well. I mean, who does Donald Trump represent? I mean, there's some kind of joke. These are really corrupt, oppressive leaders and oligarchs that are in charge in these countries, and it's the same in Israel, really. So, and of course, we look at the PA and say, how representative are they of the Palestinian people? So all of these uprisings that are taking place, you're really seeing this is a common theme where people who are they've had enough of this oppression, this corruption, this oligarchy, and they are really rising up together. I think in many contexts over the world. So we're really, I think there's going to be very, very sudden changes in a lot of places in the world. I mean, things, nobody foresaw the collapse of the Soviet Union until it happened. So, these kind of changes, these kind of very dramatic changes can happen all of a sudden. And I really think we're coming very close to that. And what lies beyond, we have to see. I mean, I don't know, but certainly, inshallah, the good guys justice will triumph in the end. And I'm very, I really cling on to that hope. And I think everybody should as well. And we should all participate. We should participate in these, in these kind of movements. For sure, the BDS, the boycott movement, is extremely important. And we have to pressure the ruling class in our respective countries and internationally. That's what we have to do. And, we will win for sure in the end, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you very much, Professor Takahashi. When you mentioned BDS, actually I have a question, but the time is limited. Okay, now is the last questions from Andre Siregar. He is a director for Regional Cooperation Ministry Foreign Affairs Indonesia. The question for all the speakers. The question is, how does Donald Trump's agenda of the supposed deal of the century impact on Palestine's economic and social development? You have 1 minute to answer. First is Bapak Niko, second Dr. Siraj, and the last one, Professor Takahashi. Bapak Niko, time is yours.
Terima kasih. Kalau menurut pandangan kami, apa yang kebijakan Trump terakhir dalam deal of century ini sangat boleh katakan membunuh ekonomi rakyat Palestina. Karena kita ketahui Palestina saat ini itu mereka tidak mempunyai sumber daya yang lebih. Mereka boleh katakan sangat tergantung dengan bantuan luar dari negara asing. Apabila kita lihat sendiri banyak bantuan-bantuan yang sudah di stop, yang awalnya itu yang diberhentikan adalah bantuan kepada UNRWA sebesar $360 juta yang dimulai dari tahun 2018 dan terus berlanjut sampai sekarang. Kemudian juga secara bilateralnya itu otomatis keadaan ekonomi di dalam negeri itu susah untuk bergerak karena bagaimanapun sumber daya yang merupakan bantuan tadi itu merupakan tulang punggung dari perekonomian Palestina. Belum lagi restriksi-restriksi yang dilakukan oleh partnernya Amerika yaitu Israel sendiri yang selalu membatasi ekspor dari negara Palestina. Ini juga membunuh industri-industri yang ada di Palestina. Meskipun industri tidak besar, mereka juga banyak berorientasi ekspor. Tapi kalau misalnya pembatasan ekspor dilakukan baik melalui border Jordan maupun langsung ke pelabuhan Israel, otomatis ekonomi dalam negeri Palestina itu tidak bisa berputar. Sehingga kondisi inilah yang sangat dibutuhkan atau nanti oleh negara Palestina khususnya kepada negara-negara sahabat. Apakah itu dalam bentuk bantuan kemanusiaan maupun dalam bantuan-bantuan yang sifatnya capacity building. Demikian pandangan kami Mbak Nini.
Thank you Bapak Niko. Next is Dr. Sirajuddin.
Thank you for the question. Donald Trump's all policies towards Palestine has been detrimental, no doubt about it. And as far as this specific policy is concerned, I would like to say that starting from the beginning, the Palestinians in Gaza, West Bank, especially in Jerusalem, they have called this deal as steal of the century, not deal of the century. So so we have to call it the steal of the century. And we are not surprised about the normalization drive. We are not surprised about your efforts towards convert the status of Jerusalem. And obviously, right now they want peace by normalizing, by forgetting. They want the world to forget the wanton human rights committed by Israel for the last 70 years. People would not do this. As Professor Saul was saying, we should not lose hope. Sudden changes in international system come unprecedented, because Trump is the lover of all right-wing people around the world. And obviously, this right-wing ideology is the politics of global imperialism. And Israel is acting as an agent of American imperialism in Middle East, and they want to maintain their hegemony in Middle East, hegemonization of the trade, hegemonization of military and diplomatic arena. They want to do all these things, and this is being done by an equation which is overlapping equation of domestic politics in United States of America, where Israeli lobby is playing die hard to get American consent for wanton crimes committed in Middle East, especially Israel as an agent. This is what I wanted to say. Thank you so much. Free Palestine.
Thank you so much, and free Palestine as well. Professor Takahashi.
Yes, thank you. Well, I like that steal of the century. I'm going to use that from now on. Thank you very much. I always just say apartheid plan. But anyway, this has absolutely nothing to do with Palestinian economic and social development. I mean, it's not a consideration in any way, shape, or form. The whole idea is that, like in South Africa, Palestinians will live in Bantustan's slums. Maybe they'll commute out to be slaves in Israeli factories or something. I mean, that's the extent of it. And there's no question of economic or social development at all. So that's it. But the whole like Dr. Muhammad just said, I mean, Trump is a hideous character who is really sort of like the embodiment of all the right-wing imperialist movements happen in the world right now. And that's just another reason why Palestine is so important, because really what Trump is trying to push forward, not only in Palestine but in the world as a whole, is a complete destruction of any kind of semblance of international justice, any kind of semblance of justice in international relations. Might makes right in the eyes of these people. There's no question of weak people being protected and rights being protected. It's strong countries impose their will on weak countries by hook or by crook, and that's just how it is. And this is, to allow this and to just sit by and allow this would mean really a reversion of the international order back to how it was in the days of European imperialism in, like the 18th century and like that, 18th century, 19th century. So it really needs to be stopped. There's no, I really do have hope that it will be stopped, not just this apartheid plan from Trump, but this movement in general. And we have to see, but once again, justice will definitely triumph in the end. So I still have hope for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Due to the limited time, we apologize because we can't cover all of the questions. But for your information, after this, CDC Al-Sharq will write policy paper relating to the discussion. Jadi perlu diinformasikan kepada seluruhnya bahwa setelah kami di CDC Al-Sharq mengadakan webinar bersama NPC, akan menuliskan sebuah policy papers, setelahnya akan dipublikasikan inshallah soon. Great, thank you. We already get more knowledge about the Palestinian issue from the 3 awesome speakers from today's webinar. Fine, thank you very much, Dr. Sirajuddin, Professor Takahashi, and Bapak Niko, and also all the participants. Our discussion about Palestine, especially on the topic of international assistance, has indeed made us to think and to do more about how far we can do for Palestine, despite many obstacles that we face. For Palestine itself, of course, there's much we can do to help, even though the result maybe not be maximized. However, we continue to hope that the assistance we provide can achieve the final goal, that is sovereignty, free Palestine. Alhamdulillah, the second series of the webinar contribution of international aid to Palestine has ended. Just for your information, that the webinar series will be held every month with different topic. And the topic for the next month webinar is Krisis Pangan, Listrik, dan Air di Palestina, with the different speakers. And thank you for your participating in today's webinar. Thank you so much to the all awesome speakers. Thank you so much to the participants. We hope to see you again. See you next month at the NPC CDC Al-Sharq webinar. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Free Palestine.
Waalaikumsalam.
Assalamualaikum.
Terima kasih Mas Agung.
Thank you to all speakers. You are all great and awesome.
Terima kasih Mbak Adit. Ya.
Terima kasih Bapak Niko. Semoga lain kali bisa hadir lagi.
Ya, siap. Tadi pertanyaan Mas Agung nanti bisa dijawab.
Iya, karena waktunya sudah limit. Terima kasih sekali Bapak.
Terima kasih. Ya, selamat. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi.
شكرا لكم ولمؤسسة الNBC مع الاندونيسي خدماتها للمية. بالرغم احنا يعني عندنا مسكرين الطرق علينا وصعبة حياتنا ومش قادرين نطلع ولا ننزل وحياتنا صعبة، ويعني الحمد لله يكتر خيرهم هيهم بيودوا لنا المية اللي مفنطرة ويخلف عليهم يعني اللي بيساعدوا الشعب على هيك مساعدة.
أشكر مؤسسة إندونيسيا في إندونيسيا وإحنا بوضع كورونا ودنا مي مفنطرة والكلام.
أنا بشكر جمعية MBC على مصرف المياه اللي وفرت لنا إياه، وأنا بشكرهم جزيل الشكر وإنهم دائما يا رب يدعمونا، لأنه المياه لأنها غير صالحة للشرب، والمياه دائما يدعمونا مياه مفلترة، لأنه الوضع عندنا صعب جدا، وأنت شايف حالة كورونا، الوضع يعني صعب 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 إنه الواحد يروح يعبي مياه. يعني أنا بتمنى إن دائما يدعمونا بمياه وحاجة ثانية، لأنه الوضع عندنا صعب مأساوي جدا، تصرف المياه عندنا بالمرة معدوم.
نشكر مؤسسة MBC اللي وفرت لنا المياه، لأنه إحنا في وضع كمرض كورونا وولادنا ولا بيطلع ولا بننزل ولا بنعبي مية ولا بنشوفها، يعني بنشكر الجمعية اللي حنت علينا وعبت لنا مية للأولاد الصغار نشرب، ولأنها هي مش موجودة عندنا بالمرة المية، فإلنا أكثر من شهر بنعاني من المية، إنه ما فيش عندنا مية بالمرة. ونشكر MBC إنه عبونا مية وساعدونا إنه إحنا نشرب.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نحن نشكر الجمعية مؤسسة MBC لدعم الشعب الفلسطيني بالمياه المفلترة المعدنية، وجزاهم الله كل خير، وشكرا لهم اخوانا الاندونسيين. الوضع صعب عنا واجت المي في وقتها، وشكرا لهم ويعطيهم العافية وفي ميزان حسناتهم، وشكرا لهم، وان شاء الله ربنا يعطيهم هيك في ميزان حسناتهم انه تبرعوا لنا بالمية اللي اجت في وقتها في الوضع اللي احنا فيه، وضع كورونا، وضع الدنيا شوب والجو اللي احنا فيه والوضع الصعب، اليهود من جهة والمرض كورونا من جهة، ربنا يبعدوا عنا وعنهم إن شاء الله ويعطيهم في صحتهم وميزان حسناتهم يا رب.
نشكر مؤسسة MBC على المية الحلوة، والله أجتنا في وقتها ويخلف عليك وبارك الله فيكم، وإن شاء الله يا رب تدعمونا بحاجة أحسن من هيك، وإحنا في الحصار هذا وفي الكورونا مرض الكورونا، يا رب جزاكم الله كل خير.
بنشكر الأندونيسي اللي وصلت لنا المية، لأنه مقطوع علينا المية والمواصلات صعبة ومش قادرين نوفر إجازة المية اللي نشرب فيها، وكتر خيرهم عن طريق الأندونيسي.
أتقدم بخالص الشكر والتقدير للأخوة في أندونيسيا وخاصة مؤسسة الNBC على هذا المشروع والمجهود المشكورين عليه، خاصة وأنهم بيحاولوا يعني يوصلوا أكبر قدر ممكن من احتياجات الناس بما فيها هو المياه الحلوة. وطبعا احنا بنعاني من شح في هذه المياه نظرا للإغلاق ومنع التجوال في جائحة كورونا، ونتقدم لهم بخالص شكر وتقدير وبارك الله فيهم جميعا.
بنشكر اندونيسيا والNBC على توفير المياه لنا، لانه احنا بنعاني معاناه شديده دائما وفيش دائما ميه متوفره لنا. بنشكرهم جزيل الشكر وخلف الله عليهم وبارك الله فيهم والله يعطيهم الصحه احسن من كل حاجه. وان شاء الله بنتأنى. وبعدين احنا في جائحه كورونا، والكورونا هذه انت عارفين يعني صعبه علينا، وبنشكركم انه دائما انتم يعني تقفوا جنبنا وتمدوا يد العون لنا.
نشكر مؤسسة NBC من أندونيسيا لوفرت لنا المي الحلو في ظل جائحة كورونا، وبنتمنى لهم التوفيق ودوام الاستمرار في هذه المساعدات للشعب الفلسطيني.